Okay, how to create a story structure based on oral histories or interviews. Well, I mean, everything we're doing is, everything I'm doing is based on interviews. And there are a million ways to create the story structure out of that. I'm not sure there's one answer. So maybe you can be more precise about what kind of oral history or story or interviews. Presumably we're talking about life history of a person, right? If you're talking about oral history, somebody talking about some event they were involved in, or something that was pivotal in their life, pivotal in the world. And so there's some kind of big...
This is a live hangout. So we're like talking to viewers and stuff.
There's
I don't know, I'm speaking to you.
chronology going on. There's some kind of big chronology that's in their life. And basically, I think in the interview, you want to ask them about that chronology. You want to ask the person about that chronology. What happened first, then what happened, and then what happened, and then what happened. And if you have chronology, then you're on the road to having a story structure already, because chronology is the basis of most of the story structure that you're going to want to use. So start with chronology and tell the story in order. And telling the story in order is already a powerful structure. And you're going to want to think a little bit too, and once you have the interviews, like what are the surprising parts of the interviews? You want to set those up early on, and you want to reveal those surprises at the right moment. And basically, you're looking for if there's a way to create a narrative arc out of somebody's actual lived experience. It's not always totally possible, but if you can think about the person who is at the center of the oral history as the protagonist, they can be moving through their life and encountering difficulties, things that are stopping them in their path, and that's how you would tell the story. Does that kind of answer what you're getting? Oh, okay, so Mary actually tweets again, interviews with gun violence survivors or witnesses of gun violence. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the kind of thing you would do. So somebody who has been through a violent incident like that, you would want to talk about their history, what brought them to that place at that time, and then what happened, and then what changes it caused in their lives. And you want to try to identify in that person what it is that they're moving towards. What are they trying to achieve in their life? What changes? This has been a pivotal thing in their life if you're telling the story, and so you want to talk about the before and the after, and what's the thing that happened in the middle, other than the gun violence. Obviously that happened, but like, what was the change that happened in their situation and their personality? And that's then your arc, is like the before and the after to that question. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, one thing that I think might help in this sort of situation is if you have a whole person's history and you're trying to make a story out of it, is to like look for the climax. Like what is the moment of most heightened energy in the story? Like, and then basically work backwards and build the story around that moment. If there's something in somebody's life that is like super powerful, and nothing else is going to top it, well then that's your climax. And so you basically build the story around like, how do we get to that point? I don't know.
Right. All right. I'm going to tweet out the link directly in Twitter. So this should work because I'm getting it from my live interface. Try this link, you guys, to get in, because I'm hearing that it's not, you're not able to get in.
Yeah, seems like I'm getting that too.
Yeah, so try the link I just tweeted on, and then my last tweet just right now. And then let's go back down and answer some questions. So Ben, any advice on translating short screenplays into comics, from Kate Foreman?
Let's see. I mean, screenplays are pretty close to comics already. So far as form, I like the idea of, I guess when you know, instead of thinking about shots in a screenplay, you're thinking about panels, you know? And it's like, if you're actually talking about like the craft of writing a comic script, there's actually a specific format that you follow. And so a lot of that stuff will translate directly. It also depends on whether you're going to draw it or if somebody else is going to draw it. The most important things to keep in mind is to keep your artist in mind. Like, don't write pages. A lot can happen very quickly on screen that might take more time on a page, and vice versa. You can maybe fit more dialogue on a page of comics than you can on like 1 minute of cinema. But
do you want to? That's the question.
Yeah.
I think the main thing for me is the big difference between film and comics is that film thinks of the big restriction in film is that you have you have scenes that are when you change from one scene to another, you have to actually have new setups, and it's expensive, it's difficult, and you really have to identify very clearly in the screenplay, here we are on this in this scene right now, and this scene is interior, nighttime, blah blah blah, and then this next scene is daytime. And in a film, and when you're writing film, you have to think about those things very, very distinctly. Whereas in comics, you can kind of slide back and forth between things really easily. And I think more in terms of sequences in comics, which are like story units as opposed to being sequences a story unit, like a narrative unit where you have narrative information, as opposed to thinking about place as much. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's, when I write scripts for comics, I'm often like, I will identify where the places are, but often I'll switch back and forth between places, and I won't spend a lot of time identifying all that stuff because it may just be a panel somewhere else and then zipping back and forth. But otherwise, it's really, it's really quite similar. Film and comics are probably the closest related art forms.
And that's a controversial statement, but
well, I mean, they're not the same,
mm-hmm.
but they're close. They both involve words and pictures, and they involve time, and in that way, they're close cousins, shall we say? So we got a lot of people on the call. Awesome. So some people getting through. I finally sent out an invite just to people who had already added to my circles. So if I happen to have already added you to my circle, you will get that invite in your email as well, I think. So Eric, do you want to ask something? You got a question? That's you. Can we hear you? Eric Thurman? No? Okay. Keith?
Let's see. I think Keith's mic is muted.
I'm unmuting you. Keith, I think you've muted yourself on your own side. You need to unmute. Everybody check. No questions from Keith. Okay. There's your controls are at the top of your screen, and you have this little bar up there. You can mute yourself. You can turn off your own video up there, and that's also where you hang up if you want to leave. Okay, Wayne, you got any questions?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, cool. Let's go back to our Twitter questions then. Where are we at here? Let's see. Okay, Alex Cox has some questions. Nope, she's just having trouble getting on.
Yeah, I think that the link that we just sent out is working. People seem to be getting in. That's what I've been sending to everybody.
Okay. Cool. I'm waiting for questions. I am ready.
Sunny just joined. Hi, Sunny.
Hi.
Sunny.
Oh, you guys can hear me too? Awesome.
Yes.
Super. Okay, so I tweeted my question already, but I guess because you guys know I have a big project, like a whole arc of someone's career, I'm struggling with thinking about how many pieces of and then you can include and still keep someone's interest, I guess.
the thing that
Okay,
I
so,
heard
I
from
tweeted my question already, but I guess because you guys know
the
I
thing
have
that I
a
heard
big
from
project, like a whole arc of someone's career,
from Ira
I'm
Glass and
probably thinking about
from Roman Mars about this, and a couple other people, has to do with rhythm. And I think that it translates into prose, it translates into comics, the idea of thinking of these things in small units. So you can have kind of almost an unlimited number of and thens and thens and thens, I think, if each piece of that has a kind of coherence to it and has a kind of little arc, and you can kind of create a rhythm of these things, so that, like, I think Roman was saying his units are like 2 minutes long, and I think Ira said his are, I think Snap Judgment is like 45 seconds. It's like every 45 seconds the music changes. And I think that that's a useful thing. It's a useful way to conceive of writing in general. You know, I think of it in terms of, you know, in comics, you know, a sequence might take 3 pages or something like that, but then I'm on to another thing, and then I might come back to it later. So I feel like that could be useful to you. I mean, you have so much incident in your story. There's so much stuff that happened. You definitely are going to want to weave in and out of that a little bit in terms of your conclusions and, like, reflections. So
right.
those units play out is like you've got a bit of anecdote and then you have a reflection, a bit of anecdote and a music change, a bit of anecdote and whatever. So I think that that's a way to think about it in terms of, like, you know, build it around scenes, build it around little bits of story that we can get into.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an academic book. You're going to have a lot of stuff to say about it, presumably. And one of the nice things you can do with all this incident is you can weave that in among exciting bits of story that we can really, you know, get into, you know?
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you're thinking of a unit as a lot smaller than a chapter or something, sort of more like a section.
Yeah.
Within a chapter.
Yeah, I mean, a chapter is a unit too. I think you want to build units within units. So
right.
within a chapter, you would want to have, say, you know, I don't know. I mean, it really depends on your voice and, like, how you're writing it. But
yeah,
maybe a 2-page section where you have, you know, you set a scene, an event happens, something happens, and then you have a little thought in there somewhere, you know, or maybe it's 5 pages or something like that. And maybe a whole chapter is only 5 pages. Or maybe you have a zillion short chapters, or maybe you have a couple, you know, like, probably I would think you would have almost, because it's a life, you'd have huge acts, you know, that then are divided up into, you know, and you're looking for turning points, and the turning points are probably where you make the chapters. And so there's probably a whole bunch of turning points, but then there's huge turning points that break the thing into part 1 and part 2.
Right. Okay, great. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Cool.
Jackie Roche on Twitter, and you can ask your questions on Twitter by tweeting the story Madlib hashtag. Jackie asks, my English 381 comics class, how to identify the and then steps in their story before interviewing.
Well, I think you do that, and I'm writing that script today. That episode will come out on Monday, where we talk about that more specifically. But I think the 2 main things you do is you do a bunch of research. You know, look into, I mean, if you're doing an interview with somebody who has anything written, or, you know, they have a blog, or there's anything public about them, you can read those things and try to figure out what are the pieces that you want to get into, because you're not talking about their entire life, but, like, whatever the elements of the story are that elements of chronology are that refer directly to the story that you want to tell. I mean, let me take this one step back. If you have an interview subject that you know you want to talk to, you want to talk to them for a reason, right? There's a reason why you're interviewing this person. You look at that reason and you say, what do I know about this already? Those are some elements of the story that you already know. And just start with those. So you may know the beginning, the end, you know, whatever it is, you know, some piece of it. Fill that in. Then when you talk to the person to set up the interview, you have a chance to ask them a couple questions. You don't want to ask the good questions. You don't want to ask the juicy questions. because you want that on tape. But you want to ask a few preliminary questions where you have, you ask them, when did this start? When did it end? Where were you then? Whatever it is. And you just ask them a couple of things and that help you slot those story units in place. And then you go, great, talk to you on Tuesday, bye, and hang up before they say anything important. And if they start to say something and tell you some great story, you're like, wait, let me stop you. I want this on tape. We'll talk about this on Tuesday, whatever day, and you hang up. So tweet us back. That doesn't answer, but I feel like that's the basic outline of what you want to do.
Just, I would just add, just to look for turning points when you're doing that pre-interview, like those moments where something changes in their life. Like those are like notes you want to take, because that is literally the and then. Like that is the point at which something changes. To be very specific. Keith asks, I'd like to get another video question, but Keith Britt asks, do you think Ira Glass's first minute rule is valid for all stories or just audio?
Well, I think it's, I mean...
Do you want to explain what that is in detail a little bit more?
The idea that it has to catch you in the first minute, is that what you're talking about, Keith? Like, that there should be some hook at the beginning, is that what we're going for here? Or are you talking about the 45-second rule?
Yeah, he says yeah.
Okay. The idea of a hook. Ira's idea is that he wants to find something, a piece of tape, something that will be absolutely unforgettable and will not let you stop listening, and put that right at the beginning. So you put some kind of like crazy thing at the beginning of the story so that everyone's like, oh my God, and they can't stop. And then basically each and this is about the 45-second rule too, or the 2-minute or whatever his unit is. That each one of those things is like an, oh my God, I gotta know what happens. Oh my God. You know, like there's a constant succession of cliffhangers essentially. You know, he's setting up just question after question after question, and you have to wait for the answer, right? So I think that that is it valid for all storytelling? It's valid. It's an approach you can use in any kind of storytelling. It is not the only approach, and I think it's important to say that. There are a million ways to tell stories that are totally equally valid. And, you know, when I was talking to, who was I talking to? When I was talking to Sean Cole, he was saying he really likes the, and Roman Mars talked about this too. There's a certain style of the audio called the, I think they call it a documentary, and it's like a British audio style. And you hear these sometimes. They will play. You know, you'll get one on late night on a local public radio station, but they don't get played that often because often they're very, very abstract and they're very gentle, and there's not a lot of like driving drama in them. They often are very dramatic and sort of subtle in different kinds of ways, but they're kind of like the art films of the audio world, I want to say. Absolutely worth looking for, and you can find stuff like if you listen to Third Coast, they'll often play some of the best, you know, European or no, they call them features. I'm sorry, audio features. That's what you want to look for if you want to hear this stuff. And sorry.
Sorry, I could say they often rely more on atmospherics and sort of creating this sort of like mood to sort of like envelop you into this kind of cocoon of sound, and that pulls you through.
Yeah, if anybody listened to that piece, If, that I referred to at some point in one of the earlier episodes, that is very much in the audio feature vein. Mm-hmm. And I think it's an incredibly powerful piece. So there's nothing about that form that makes it not powerful. I feel like the style that Ira and most of these other shows promote is very Hollywood. You know, it's very American. It's like move it fast, keep it going, let's go, next thing, next thing, next thing. And I love it, but it's, you know, and I do think it can work for all different kinds of media, but it's not the only way to go.
Yeah, you see it in like a frame, you know, frame stories in movies when it's like oftentimes if a film has kind of has a lot of setup in the story, what they'll do is they'll take sometimes they don't even script it like this, but they will take a scene from the middle of the film and like an action scene and then put it right, it's the first scene of the movie, so it's like, what's going on? It's generating all of this
I love to do that.
interest.
Yeah, I love to start stuff, with
Yeah.
action. I think it's a really cool way to do stuff. And even with Out on the Wire, I often will have, we'll pick a piece of tape. The last episode we did this, and we're going to do it again for episode 5. We pick a piece of tape, and you don't quite know what's going on. You don't know who's talking until somewhat later in the show.
Mm-hmm.
That's an approach too. So let's move on to another question.
Do we have somebody on video who'd like to ask a question? See, we've got Dean and Alex.
Hello.
Hey, Alex,
Hi.
you have a question?
Hi, I don't have video. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. I'm trying to think of a question. As you know, I've got a lot of projects, and it seems like I have maybe 10 projects going at once, and I'm generating a lot of material. Any ideas for sort of managing, say, a lot of recorded material? Say I'm doing a diary recording every day. So I've got a lot of sound files and things. And just keeping, I guess, all these things going. Are there folder systems, or how can I think of keeping some sort of sanity and order? Because I know Stephanie Food, she said she'd go out and recorded, she'd have 7 stories going at one time. She'd go someplace and have all.
How you keep your tape in order? Dean, do you mean literally how you keep track of what you've got in your tape?
Yeah, that's one part of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would say it's not easy. It's definitely not easy because I have tons of tape for this archive, all the stuff I'm working with, and Ben knows my system is kind of crazy, so he might have better ideas about this. But basically, I had a I eventually transcribed or logged everything, and it's in a Scrivener file. And Scrivener is a writing software, and so it's searchable, so I could find stuff. And then I made sure to name each tape in a consistent way, and then made sure that same name was in the log document. So
is the Scrivener file a combined audio and text document?
You can put audio in it, but it's actually really, it gets super unwieldy really fast because it's just a lot of storage. No, what I'm saying is I would put the title of the audio, and I would title audio 2015, 11/03. So it would have the date that I recorded it as the first thing in the name, the year first, then the month, then the day, so that when it is in a folder on my computer, it would list down in order. You'd see everything in order. And then I would have, descriptive names for everything. So if you're doing an audio diary, you would do, today's date. Maybe you have a code for audio diary, so you don't have to take up room for it. So it's AD hyphen, and then whatever topic you were talking about. So there's something in the title.
The topic at the end. So the topic goes at the end of the file name.
Yeah, because you want to put the date at the beginning so that everything sorts in order. Because if you
Beautiful.
put the names at the front, then it doesn't sort.
How was you doing it?
Then I would copy and paste that name into my text files where I had the logs so that I could search on the computer for them.
Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like titling invoices. It's you do it for clarity mostly.
Mm-hmm. Titling, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then in terms of knowing what's in it, you have to log it. You have to, the thing about doing audio is that you have to make the audio, and then you have to listen to the audio, then you have to edit the audio, and that all takes real time. So, it's really time consuming. And when you are listening to it, make sure you're taking these notes as you go. Try VoiceBase, this thing that Ben found. It's really great. It does very good transcriptions.
If your audio is clear, it is like it's really awesome. It does machine translation or machine transcriptions of recorded audio and just spits out logs basically. There's a similar service called Pop-Up Archive, which is a little bit more journalistic focused, but costs some money if you do it for more than like an hour. I'm putting the link to VoiceBase in the group chat, so you can check that out if you like.
You should tweet it too, Ben, so it goes to people who can't see the chat.
Yeah.
And I think that the thing is, VoiceBase I think is just as good as the what's the other one called?
Pop-Up Archive.
Archive in terms of quality. You do need to go through it again. It's not like it's suddenly looks like a script, but if you automatically generate this thing, then as you're listening to it again, you can just you can clean it up as you go, and it's efficient time-wise.
I've got another Twitter question.
Yeah.
Kristen Girard asks, suggestions for how to plot a personal narrative if the climax is a concept/truth rather than a singular event. I think that's a really interesting and difficult question.
It definitely is, but I also think that maybe Kristen needs to look at what the climax is, because I think basically the climax of a book that's any good is going to have at that peak point, there's going to be some kind of concept truth. There's going to be some kind of realization, some kind of change that the character is going through. That's going to happen, but that's not the action. You know, the climax of a story, generally speaking, you want it to be, if it's not an action thing where it's like literally a battle, and even then, you kind of want it to be a dilemma. You want it to be a moment when the protagonist is challenged to his or her utmost, personally, like at a core level, and then has to make a call. And making that call is a way of, that is a moment of change for the protagonist, and that reveals truth about the protagonist, and probably reveals, like not everybody, a bunch of people who were doing, especially when we were in the focus sentence XY section of the Out on the Wire group, a lot of people want what's important or what's interesting about the story to be the theme of the story. So like the concept level. And it's not. That's not what's interesting about the story. What's interesting about the story is the individual way that concept gets manifested in the real or invented events of the story. Getting back to the Ira question, the first minute thing, it's like, if you don't have that hook, you don't have that thing that's like, wow, I didn't see that coming. It's hard to make a story resonate. It's hard to, and especially it's hard, and what I want to say is not the story resonate. It's hard to make that theme resonate if it's not flowing through a character and that character's struggles with trying to achieve something. It's just a really powerful vehicle. So Kristen, tweet back again if that kind of covered it, and let us know.
I think the Robert McKeon response to that would be that revelations only occur through action. Like it's not actually possible to have a revelation or to discover a truth without discovering, or without some action forcing somebody to have that realization. And so maybe the climax isn't, so that truth can be the sort of the philosophical climax of the story, but the physical climax of the story is whatever action preceded that realization.
Right, that's what I'm trying to get at, that it has to flow through people doing things and making decisions. It doesn't have to. It probably should, though, most likely. Do we have a live questioner?
I guess I'm wondering, like, I come from much more of a documentary background than a journalism background, and how, like, what do you think is a breach in ethics in terms of moving story around, especially in direct interviews? Like, not necessarily changing the person's, like, the core of what the person is saying, but the narrative of the way they're saying it.
Well, I think that's a really complicated question to which there's probably not one answer. In general, the only person who doesn't get edited ever is the President of the United States. You know, he's the only one you ever hear saying in a clip on NPR. And in general, I feel like getting a person's message across, what they're trying to say, as long as you can be fairly confident of what it is they're trying to say, that's the question, like that's the rub, is primary, and the specific order in which they say things is secondary. I mean, I grappled with this a lot in the book Out on the Wire because I ended up rewriting a lot of stuff. You know, I switched out words, or I, cut big chunks of things out, and it's partly down to just the limitations of the medium. You know, when you're making comics, you have this problem of space. You know, that there's literally this much space on the page, and there's only that many words that can fit, and you can't just keep going and going and going. But it's a really good discipline, I find, to have to cut things down that way, and it gets better. I'm always questioning myself, like, is this accurate to what the person is trying to represent to me? Is this accurate to what I actually observe? And you always have to be checking yourself, but I do feel like there's a lot of leeway there. I mean, if you knew the extent to which Radiolab rearranges things, for example, like taking sentences and just like taking all the words apart and rearranging them, it's enormous, and I think it's okay. I think generally speaking, what they do, we've gotten into trouble once or twice, but basically what they do very, very well and very, very ethically. But I think each person has to kind of make that line for themselves. And there's certainly people like, like Jay Allison, who's like, I won't touch it. I don't want to take a breath out. It just is what it is. I want to represent people as they are. And then you have like Jad, who's like, I like the rhythm. I want this to sound like this. Does that answer anything at all?
Oh yeah, it's very. I know Radiolab has gotten in trouble a couple of times, and it's really interesting. It's just interesting too to hear how you grapple with it. So yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you.
Like for me, like when I am cutting audio and it's like you want it to sound like them. I think that's what's most important. So long as it sounds like them, and if they and sort of stutter a lot, then I'm more inclined to leave that in. But it sort of does become sort of challenging, and it becomes really tempting to like cut all of that like dead space. For example, like we're on the episode that we're working on, there's a lot of Jay Allen meditative way of speaking. He actually speaks quite slowly and you can tell that he's thinking, and it's like my instinct is to like just like chop all that stuff up and push all those sounds together for the sake of timeliness, but sometimes I just have to say like no. It's like if you do that, then you sort of destroy the integrity of what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so let's go back to Twitter for a minute. Let's see.
Matthew Vincent has a question.
Yeah, and I'm going back a little bit to TapeSync here. The TapeSync asks about the history of This American Life. I don't know it in depth, but basically Ira attributes his style and his training to Dave Isay and his radio documentaries, and he also worked a bunch with other radio producer's whose name I'm now going to forget. Oh my God. Anyway, there's a bunch of people who did predate the style or used this style, and you would hear this style on the radio, but nobody ever put it into like one show. And I think that was his big innovation, and make it sort of like everything was, narrative nonfiction, as opposed to every once in a while you get a 5-minute story over here or over there. I think that's where it comes down to. And those names will occur to me, and I will say them in the middle of something else, and you will not be expecting it. Okay, so back to Matthew Vincent. In the early stages of developing fiction, is it normal to think of 50 million micro-permutations, or does that signal weak character? Oh, Matthew. Meaning, I guess, that does it mean that if you every time you're thinking about the story, you think, oh, well, it could be this, or it could be that, or it could be this, or it could be that? I'm not sure if that's exactly what you mean, but I think that is a totally normal stage to be going through. I think that the way that you get out of that stage is you have to make certain. There's a couple things you can do. I think with the protagonist, especially, you can write more backstory and kind of, create a deeper sense of who that character is, so that you are able to reflect that in their actions, so that if you know the kind of person it is and you understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, that your decisions about what happens next. You also need to go through, basically, if you go through a story Mad Lib, you're going to be making a lot of decisions at that point. And those decisions will be things like, who is the protagonist? What does the protagonist want? Once you know those two questions, and then what stands in his or her way, you're well on your way. You're really going to be able to narrow things down, because everything will be able to be filtered through that idea of, like, who's this protagonist? What does he want? What stands in the way? And other stuff, other permutations, other directions, they won't necessarily, you'll have a bunch of different choices about how to play that out, what are those things. But once you do those things, once you say those things, and you establish those points, it starts putting constraints on the storytelling, and constraints are healthy. Constraints make for better work.
Is there a tool that helps you weed out the sub-stories that are not helpful to the main story to move forward? And that is from KT.
Yes, it's called the Story Mad Lib. Again, like, if you think every time you start getting, you're wading around in stories, and whether it's fiction or nonfiction, every time you're kind of like, oh, what's next? I don't know. If you go back to those questions, who's the protagonist? What does he want? What stands in his way? You'll notice that a lot of the things that are distracting to you don't play into that story. And they may be super entertaining. Like, every time I write a book, like, there's some great scene that I'm just like, I love this scene. It's just so enjoyable, it's so funny, or like, there's great dialogue here, or I love how you meet this character, or whatever. Like, there's whole threads of characters that I've invented and written whole scenes with, and all this stuff, and you just got to cut them because they don't come back to that central arc of the story, and that's your filter. That's how you filter things out. And somebody said, I think it's maybe from McKee's story, that every scene has to either move the story forward or reveal character. And the character, and I would add to that the character that's revealed has to be something that moves the story forward. That it's not like you're just, oh, I like flowers, and I reveal that about my character. No, it's like, if the liking flowers doesn't play into the story at some point, you don't spend time establishing that.
There's the thing that he describes about revealing characters, there has to be, like, a scene starts with an emotional charge, either positive or negative. Like, the characters either feel good or bad at the beginning of the scene, and by the end of the scene, that charge has to have moved somehow. Like, either they feel worse or they feel better than they started. If they feel the same as they did at the beginning of a scene, then nothing has actually happened in the scene.
It's a good test, although I have to say I've tried that on a book I was writing. I tried to do analysis on all my scenes that way, and I was like totally confused. So if you find that confusing, that freeze?
You're fine now.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So we've got a question from, I guess Jackie is having her English class like watch this, which is, hi Jackie's English class. So one of her students, Kayla, is asking how to write a Mad Lib about a historical event that communicates the context and different points of view but focuses on a protagonist. And she actually says the event is a 60s campus sit-in. The protagonist is the leader, and the conflicting element is the administration, and the issue is how to focus without losing complexity or other points of view.
Okay, so let me review this. What the person wants to do is to write a story about a sit-in on a campus.
Yeah, and the protagonist is the leader, and the antagonist, I guess, is the administration, and it's like, how do you focus? How do you do that without? How can you convey both the context of the situation and also the follow the dramatic arc of a character, I guess?
I think that there's a million ways to do that. I don't necessarily think there's any conflict here between what the student wants to do and the fact that there's a sole-focused protagonist. I think that's a super common way to tell a story like this, is through the eyes of somebody. I think one thing that the student could think about is to think about this is a David Mamet thing from on directing film. Don't follow the protagonist around. Don't just like go around behind the protagonist and watch what he does all the time. There's lots of other people you can look at and lots of other stuff you can look at. So you can have scenes that take place that the protagonist would never see. Cut away to the administration, cut away to somebody else in the group. And I think that if you organize the narrative arc around the protagonist being the leader of this sit-in, he has or she has a goal with the sit-in, and the administration is standing in the way. So you have the elements that you need, but that one character's goal stands in for the group's goal. And you certainly can have a sort of like a whole bunch of secondary characters who have conflicting desires and motivations that play into this thing, and you can switch back and forth and have things like, you have the leader and his buddy talking about one thing, and then over here you have two other people who want something kind of different. They're talking now, and then we see what's happening on the administration side, and then we cut back to some historical thing that happened 5 years ago that set the whole thing up. It's a complex story because there are a lot of players, but it's not that complex because it's an event that has a beginning, middle, and an end, has a goal, and either achieves that goal or it doesn't. So I feel like it's a fairly, the question is how to do it without losing focus. Well, keep your eye on the ball. Keep your eye on what does the protagonist want, what stands in the way, and what is he doing about it? Or what are they doing about it? Because it can be kind of a collective protagonist in a sense.
Yeah, I think sort of having one character stand in for the movement as a whole is a good idea. I guess I'm thinking a little bit. The thing that pops into my head is like I haven't seen the movie Stonewall. I think it's called, like the new movie about like the Stonewall riots, but it got a lot of criticism because it was sort of like trying to portray this much larger movement through the eyes of one character who is maybe not representative of the larger LGBT Stonewall thing, and so there's a danger to that too. Yeah,
there absolutely is, and I think that's if the mission of this sit-in is not this character's mission, but it really is a larger mission of more people, then you do want to have multiple protagonists, all at odds with each other, talking about different things. Okay, so let's see. So Eric or Katya, who are on the call, do you have any questions? If you do, and if you don't have audio, then stick them in the chat box. Eric, you do?
Hello? Can I say something?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Go.
Okay. I have a question about this bigger story thing. We were talking about in the last podcast, and there is a story and there is something bigger that's behind it. And I'm curious, if you are in the podcasting medium, do you imply it, or do you pronounce it? I mean, how's it working? I mean, is it do you give people space to wonder and kind of think of it as it's an art and they should come up with their own bigger story? You just imply it well enough so they could understand it, or you pronounce it as your opinion and stuff?
Are you talking about sort of having thematic content in your story? Is that what you mean?
No, I think what she's asking is do you basically say it? Do you tell the audience? Does the reporter tell the audience this is why this moment is important, or do you imply that?
I think that's an aesthetic question, and I think
it's super interesting philosophical question too.
It is, and I think it changes depending on the story and depending on the moment. I mean, there are moments when I think it's really important for us to do it a lot more than we usually do. People are really reluctant to do that, and I'm finishing up the script for the next episode right now, and one of the things I do what I have in there is just a bunch of stuff that I know is true and that I like and that I think is going to work, but then I'm just it can feel just like a mass of stuff if you're listening, and so I have to step away at certain times and say this is important because of this. So pay attention to this part that I'm talking about right now. That's called signposting, and it's a really important technique. I talk about it a bunch in the book, Out on the Wire. And then the other way that happens is if you're somebody's telling their own story, or you're talking about something not like what I'm talking about in Out on the Wire, where it's sort of a bunch of facts or information, but in somebody's telling of their tale, if they have a reflection about what's going on and they have some ideas about what's going on, you might want to highlight that, or you might want to say the reason this is important is this. Like Hannah was saying in the last episode, she's a lot of times I need to, with the framing, I need to step back and say, why am I telling this story? Let me go back to my XY, although she doesn't, I don't think, do an XY in a formal way, but basically she is in the middle of her story and she's like, what's my why? And then she often will put it in explicitly and just write explicitly what the why is there, and the reason you care about this is this. And part of that is because it's audio and because things can slide by really quickly. And I think in prose and in comics and some other forms, you can get away with a lot more letting people understand things up to a point. I think people go too far with it, but up to a point you can let that happen in a way that it's not impossible, but it's harder to do in audio because things can just whip by and you miss them. So I think figuring out a way that you're comfortable with signposting and that you're comfortable with framing explicitly, to what level you're comfortable with that in a given story at a given moment is important. And I think most of us feel really squeamish about it in a way that we don't need to. I mean, I've done a bunch of it in the last few episodes, and I don't think there are a lot of times when anybody really noticed. It's just part of how I talked. I just said the thing, and so you woke up at that moment like, oh, okay, that's the thing I'm supposed to pay attention to. And I forget to do it all the time too. So, I often have to go back in and, add it again, add something in. I hope I remember often enough. But it's a thing that it takes time to figure out. Does that sort of address your question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
So Eric,
I'm out of time and I've got to go in 2 minutes, but I'm going to talk to Eric here. So Eric, what do you got? Oh, can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, Eric. I guess your mic is not working. He was asking me in the chat.
You want to type a question?
Yeah, feel free to type it.
You got the chat window open on the side there?
Yeah, I guess I can add something to Katya's in the meantime. In that, one of the things that, in listening to some of the interviews that we've been working with, some of the stuff we've had to cut is like different shows' philosophical opinions on this idea of like, do you basically tell people what the story is about or don't you? And This American Life is very much like, yes, we tell you, the reporter will tell you, like, this is why it matters to everybody walking the face of the earth. Whereas Snap Judgment, which in style is actually, in form, seems quite similar, will almost never do that. Sometimes they'll let the participant, the interviewee, say it, but it's sort of in line with Glenn's thinking that like people need to be able to speak for themselves. Okay, so Eric just posted his question, and he says, how does a story Mad Lib differ between a single book versus a series, and how can the story Mad Lib be applied to a book within a series?
I absolutely think that it applies in all those ways. I think that basically the story Mad Lib, the way I designed it, is to try to have the narrative arc and the framing all within the structure. A narrative arc, including some of the steps of escalation. And the way I look at something like a book in a series is that the individual book ideally has a complete narrative arc in it, a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is nested within a larger narrative arc. And so you have the spark, if it's a series with a bunch of volumes in it, you have a spark at the beginning which sets up the entire series, and you answer that at the very end, the last most important climax. But for each individual volume in between, you want to have a good chunk of complete action. I'm not totally, Trish Trash here, I'm not totally following that, I have to say, with Trish Trash, where there isn't really a complete arc, but there's a bunch of smaller story arcs, little things that there's a sort of beginning, middle, and end within that. But I think depending on the length of the book, if you're talking about, and I think you're talking about complete graphic novels that are then a series of graphic novels, right? Yeah, you definitely want to have, you want to set up a smaller spark for that individual volume that gets resolved within it. And you also, it's really important to, especially for something like that, where people may not get the entire series, you want a sense of finality and like resolution for readers within the volume. And then, you certainly want to open the doors to what's going to happen in the future. You don't want to like make people feel like they're completely done. But on the other hand, you don't want to leave these vast amounts of like dangling whatever either. So, you have to make a balance. But I think that's, it's kind of like, think about it like a TV series or something like that. Each episode of Lost has an arc, but like the entire series of Lost has an arc, which may or may not get resolved as you like, but was, something. So, yeah, I think that's the approach that you want to get to.
Mm-hmm. Stories are you can sort of think of them like fractals. It's like you have one arc that is the whole story, and then within that arc there are little arcs, and then when you look within those little arcs you have scenes that have arcs, and then within the scenes you have beats that have arcs, and it's like it's a fractal. It's like dumb metaphor.
I agree with that. Like you can each, like the whole thing of the scene analysis, the key idea of like the change of emotion or whatever is sort of like the minimum level of like what has to happen in the scene. That's an arc. Something like you enter the scene, characters enter a scene, something happens which causes a change, and that change means that they leave different than they came in. And so that's an arc. And you want to have that in every scene. You want to have something happens in the scene. There's a reason why we're there. If you walk into a scene, people are watching TV, and then you leave the scene, you go somewhere else, I don't know why we just did that. If you're drawing comics, I don't know why you just spent a week drawing that. Right? Okay, so that was awesome. Did we cover it? Are you good? Thumbs up? Okay, cool. All right, thanks everybody for coming. I know we're still grappling with some tech stuff, but we did get some people actually on the call. I'm very happy about that. People are seeing it live, I can tell from Twitter. Very happy about that. And next time we'll do it even better. So thanks everybody for coming, and I hope this was fun for you. It was fun for me. And I will we'll be back with a new episode next Monday.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.